Oh, I love that new intro. It's so much fun. The music is great. If we can
It's
actually hear it, we can't hear it when we're monitoring on Zoom. But hello, welcome to Live at Epiphan. It is Thursday at 3 p.m. My name is Cameron, and this is Marta.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We see some people in chat. Hello, Tim. Hello, Craig. Thank you so much for joining us. And today we're going to be talking about 4 levels of redundancy for your live stream. So we're going to be talking about professional live streaming for those mission critical events like concerts and sporting events and conventions. Streaming has to be infallible. It has to work. So we're going to talk about how live streaming professionals make that happen.
That's right,
And
Marta. We have a Pearl 2 super user in California. Actually, he's not too far away from where you're located by, I guess,
by
by
plane,
airplane, as we
by
learned.
airplane, because
Yeah, exactly.
he's a
This is
pilot.
not it's not part of the interview, but Mike was telling us about how he buzzes around on his plane and he just hops in, goes for a flight.
Yes, and I think his office is located not too far from an actual airfield, so makes it really easy, makes it really convenient.
His office is literally located in an airfield. It is like he had airplanes outside of his building when we were
Yeah.
talking to him that were doing engine tests, and it can be a very loud environment. He doesn't have a studio there. It's not set up for creating videos in the same way that we would think about creating content, but more of producing the actual content, right?
Right. So he doesn't, it's okay that all that noise is outside because it doesn't affect his work per se.
Exactly, exactly. I think we said hello to a couple of people off of the bat, and looks like we've got some more people coming in. So we've got some producer Alex Lisman. He's watching from Toronto, Canada. Hello, Alex. That's right down the highway from me.
Oh,
Craig
really?
Mullen is watching from West Virginia. I've only ever been to East Virginia, so I have to go and visit West Virginia sometime.
You've only been to East. Yeah. Well, West Virginia is better than East Virginia, I
Oh
think.
yeah, is East
Yeah.
Virginia even a thing? I don't know if that's the
No,
case.
it's not. It does
It's
not
not.
exist. There's a Virginia and there's a West Virginia. Ah.
Uh,
You poor.
Why didn't they go with East Virginia? That doesn't make sense. We'll get into that, I guess, in another
Yes.
episode. But
Yes.
Marta, like you mentioned, this episode is all about levels of redundancy, and you've talked about why that's important. Can you kind of cue us up a little bit on what we're about to get into here?
So we've talked to Mike Salas, who again is a live streaming professional, and he's going to go over the ways that he basically backs up each individual piece of his streaming workflow. This is going to include, let's see here, I'm just going to jump to my notes. So we're talking about backing up your program feed, your encoder, your network connection, and your streaming destination. So all of those kind of points of potential points of failure have a backup path. And Mike is going to walk us through how he sets it up and how all of that good stuff works.
Cool. I'm trying to throw the title up right now. We've noticed the titling gets a little bit delayed when we're using the VPN and it's going via NDI and the new blue titler in the studio. But excuse me, our viewer Craig just commented that we are the best Virginia. So I hope that's actually on the license plate. Like if it says it, the little tagline at the top or the bottom of the license plate,
Yeah, let
something
us
like
know,
that.
Greg. Let us know.
Yeah, exactly. Let us know if
Um,
that's on there. But lots of viewers today, so without further ado, Marta, let's maybe jump into the interview with Mike.
Yes, this is going to be a pre-recorded segment. I was talking to Mike earlier this week, and you're about to view that very segment right now. We have joining us Mike Salas, who is a live streaming professional. Hi, Mike. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So we would like to ask you about your setup, how you're doing things. But before that, could you tell us just a little bit about your company and what you guys do?
Sure. So I'm Savvy. We started as an audio video solutions provider, just AV support for mainly corporate events, and kind of grew from there 7 years ago. We spun off into live streaming and have made that um, our core competencies more within the last 3 years. we've really focused on streaming.
So you've streamed a good deal of events and you've seen it all.
I can't say I've seen it all. Every time I say I do, I see something else. But I've definitely seen a lot, and we've streamed a lot of different things, tons of different use cases, some very unique, some really specific, and some that we've learned a lot from. So yeah, we've seen a bit.
Well, I'm sure that you know almost every single point of failure, you know, where things can go wrong. But I'm wondering if you started out with this fancy setup. I'm sure your first setup was very different. So can you tell us about where this all started? What your setup looked like in the beginning?
It was essentially two top of the line MacBook Pros running Wirecast software with a capture card device, and it was, you know, same as I treat my pearls. I had a primary and backup for each, and that's how we'd stream. There were some limitations that we ran into, so it didn't last very long. We got the pearls and operating with them ever since.
So right off the bat, you had redundancy built into your workflow.
Always, yeah.
I think that's what really sets apart an amateur production from a professional one. You have to make sure you have those backup paths in any situation. How would you say one should approach foolproofing your streaming setup? What should you be paying attention to?
I would say just pay attention to what could go wrong, right? And how quickly you can recover from something if it does go wrong, right? Is it a equipment failure? Is that something that's fixable? Does the equipment actually need to be replaced? I mean, most of the stuff that we deal with, thankfully, in the professional AV world isn't built to fail, right? I mean,
pick reliable pieces of equipment, right? So pick reliable gear.
Absolutely. Sometimes saving money on mission critical equipment isn't worth, you know, it's like that old saying, you get what you pay for. That's kind of learned the hard way sometimes in production world.
Yeah. And what is your approach to picking gear? How do you usually go about that?
I do a lot of research. My wife says I geek out. You know, if it ticks all the boxes for me, then if a demo is available, I'll ask for one. If not, you know, I'll just find the use case to purchase one and play with it and learn it from there.
Let's talk about the various levels of redundancy. We're going to be talking about 4 main levels of redundancy today, and they are program feed output, encoder level, network connection, and CDNs and streaming servers. So let's talk about the program feed output, Mike. I know that you work with AV production companies that basically produce the entire event, and then they hand you the feed, the final feed. And I know that it's a dual program output that you usually use. Can you explain how that works?
The video switchers typically have, you know, program out, and in circumstances where the production only has one video switcher to feed the whole show, we'll just take dual feeds out of it. So they'll essentially take an auxiliary output, feed program into it, and that feeds one of my encoders or primary and backup. So that's the most common scenario. The full redundant scenarios is when we have dual video switchers essentially coming off of a distribution unit that splits the signal. And both of those are actually independently feeding a primary and a backup system.
So the 2 feeds that you're receiving, they are perfectly in sync with each other, right?
Yeah, so the video switcher itself is hooked up to a timecode generator and it's gen locked to the whole system, the whole video system, and the feeds that I'm getting are coming off of that.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the encoder level of redundancy. So we know that you like using pearls, and you usually have 2 of them during most of your setups. Can you talk a little bit about how you get them to be set up exactly the same?
I'll go into one, and then I'll call it my mastery unit, and I'll build a preset that all of them share. And for the most part, it has every channel, every ISO, every encoding profile, every layout already built. And then, you know, the fine tuning that happens per show is done on site. for that event. But at any point, I can put it back to its default state, and that matches them all up.
So can you do that remotely? Can you load a preset remotely if you needed to?
Yeah, absolutely. We do that. We've done that in the past, actually, through AV Studio.
So here we see that you have two pearls set up. And then we can jump into the next level of redundancy, which is the network connection. Mm-hmm. So how do you diversify your network connection, Mike?
So for this show specifically, on the image you're showing, we only backed up the primary network connection. So the primary encoder is getting hardwired internet, and it was going into the cell bonded modem, then out of the cell bonded modem into the encoder. So in the event that the hard line failed, it was backed up to cellular.
Is that how you generally use it? Or you said that for this specific setup, that's what you used. Do you have a different scenario?
Different scenarios is dual cell bonded modems, where we're backing up each primary and backup network connection. And that's if we get primary and backup network connections. More often than not, we typically see a primary network connection that's split by a just local switch that then gives us our two connections. So each one's going down the same pipe, and we're still backing it up via the cell bonded modem.
Mm-hmm. So if you're at a venue, you're likely to use the hardwired LAN that they provide, right? That Ethernet. Mm-hmm. And then you're also backing it up with a cell modem.
Correct. Yeah, it passes the hardwired venue connection passes through the cell bonded modem, and it has a failover built in that in the event that the hardwired fails, the cell bonded will kick in.
So do you ever use satellite trucks as backup?
We use satellite trucks in two different scenarios, right? So your most standard scenario, uplink or downlink, where they're getting the signal, shooting it up to the bird, and then it gets pulled down somewhere. When we do it that way, as a matter of fact, the most recent event that we just did over the weekend, we had a satellite truck, and it was going out to the bird and down into New York, a network operations center. And that was our backup path that had an encoder on site. Another scenario, the most common way that we use it isn't so standard. We use it as a sat IP, so that the satellite truck actually provides network drop, satellite-based network drop as a backup independently to the venues. It essentially turns satellite data into Ethernet cable. I mean, in simple terms, I don't know how it does it. It's some kind of satellite engineer magic.
I'll take your word for it.
Sure.
So we have those three things that you can use for your network connection. Basically, the Ethernet, the local. So it would be like the venue Ethernet. You can use cell modems, and you can also turn to a broadcast truck, to a satellite truck, if everything else is unavailable. All right, so why don't we move on to the next level of redundancy? We're going to be talking about streaming destinations. So Mike, why don't you talk to me about how the video gets from the Perl encoders to the viewers and the redundancy involved in that?
Primary and backup encoder, stream to a cloud transcoder, gets wrapped in an HLS playlist. Both those get sent to a CDN and hit the HTML5 player with redundant playlists.
And what is a redundant playlist?
The HTML5 player references the playlist that it's retrieving on the stream, right? So if you've got redundant playlist and it doesn't pull the stream off of one, it reverts to the other.
And is there special precautions that you take, or how do you know how many viewers to expect, and how do you know that the CDN is going to be able to carry the weight?
So typically on most events that we support, we ask our clients what your anticipated audience size, because it doesn't just go specific to the CDN. Even the way we build it on the back end in the tech stack, and the instances that we apply to it, and even the cloud transcoding. But Akamai and Fastly both are built to just auto scale. But even before it hits that, our platform is built to auto scale as well when we prepare it off of the information that we typically get in discovery with clients in the new events.
I actually wanted to ask about power sources and surge protection and stuff like that. Would you say that you Do you have a redundancy built into the power source?
As a matter of fact, this unit behind me, sorry, this side, has a APS rack mount backup battery system. So in the event that this office were to go down, it stays up for an hour before I completely lose power. And we typically have those on site with us, or we request them from the AV company. So if we're running off of house power, the mission critical components, obviously you can't run an entire show off of a UPS. You know, if you tried, it would last maybe all but 2 minutes. The mission critical components, at least, to have enough time to spin things down in the event that power were to fail.
Does that mean that you expect power to go back up? So you can't run it from the backup device?
You can't run it from the backup device in circumstances where you want an actual complete backup. We bring in generators, and I'm not talking like the kind that you have likely in your garage. I'm talking like the big show generators that are pulled behind the big semi trucks.
Does that happen often?
I mean, even just the show that we just did this past weekend, we had dual generators, and we weren't running off the house power at all. I think you'll find that most big events do not run off of house power. Most even the big sporting events do not run on house power. They have dedicated generators.
So there's 5 levels of redundancy. This is all wrong. Scratch everything. So I'm wondering how the automatic failover happens on each of these levels. Is it something that you have to go in and manually set up, or do the devices just know what to do on their own?
I mean, so there's different ways that we use our systems, right? And in true redundant form, it's just kind of built in the back end to fail itself over, and you kind of set those parameters. And in the simplest form, it's done by hand. So sometimes I'll have a primary and backup encoder on site, but I'm only pushing a single stream. In the event that something happens to that encoder, I start the backup, right? So
you're controlling that manually.
Yeah, you're controlling that manually. Whereas all the other stuff beyond that, that's built into the cloud transcoding systems and the HTML5 player and the dual playlists, that all happens automatically. You know, in the event the video switcher fails, it fails. There's no backup there, right? Both primary and backup encoder lose their signal.
All right, Mike. So the final question we have is, how do you monitor the health of your stream, and which variables are you looking at in that control process?
So there's a whole online stack that we have built that shows the inbound bit rate, the outbound bit rate, the frames per second that it's receiving, and the keyframe interval. And each one's its own line, its own graph. And what's nice about the Epiphan pearls is they've got a constant bit rate. So one thing we like to see is just a nice horizontal line. Anytime we start seeing variances in that line, we start looking at local network, making sure there's no fluctuations in the network in our feed. On the actual Pearl, if any flags occur there, we also typically like to have a local area network administrator on call or on hand to be able to give us our actual network statistics locally, if we, especially if we don't have dedicated bandwidth. But on the server side, inbound bit rate, outbound bit rate, frames per second, keyframe interval, essentially all the stats that you really need to know coming from the encoder to the server.
And so what are your contingency steps if you see that something is going wrong? What is the first thing you do, the second thing you do?
So if I start seeing inbound bitrate drops, again, I'll look at the local network. If the outbound bitrate drops, that's past the cloud transcoder. That's what's actually feeding the player at that point. So I'll start looking at that. If it's frames per second, I guess that would be hardware related. So I would fall back to the encoder at that point.
Okay, I think we can wrap it up there. Mike, thank you so much for joining us for this interview, and thank you for all the insights.
Great, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, sorry for the delay flipping back over. I set an alarm on my phone and it was going off and scaring me. And I've got that like submarine, that submarine alarm sound.
It
Ah, so
was
flustered.
really scary. I heard it too.
There was a lot of great questions going on in the chat, and I was just messaging Mike just on the side just to get a few answers for you guys. So, why don't we jump into the first one here that I saw from Danny? Was it Danny that was asking about the cost of the truck? Or
I think that was just me asking about the cost of the truck, Cameron,
oh,
just
okay.
just for my
I thought I
personal.
saw someone ask that. All right, Marta. Well, the cost of a satellite truck rental for the day, according to Mike, would be about $3,000 to $5,000, and of course, you actually have to pay the people that are in the truck, so that's going to be a little bit expensive as well.
Right, right. So it's a good solution, but it's a very expensive one, as someone mentioned in chat.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. It is a very. It is. It's pricey, but at the end of the day, if you want your event to be seamless and you want it to go off, then you need to be investing the money into it. And you're likely not doing the event for free, so you're getting paid as well. And it's important for advertisers, right, to have that spot.
That's right. That's right. And Danny is also asking, does Soul-Mounted have comparable bandwidth, or does it entail a step down in resolution?
So I would say, and not knowing for sure, I've actually invited Mike, to join the chat and just to see if he can answer some of these questions for you folks. But I would imagine that it wouldn't be any downgrade. In fact, in some areas, especially in the states where there's a lot of really good LTE and 5G coverage, that could be a stronger signal than you could get on a regular communication line for maybe DSL. It's not going to be comparable to fiber, but it's also going to be pretty high up.
That's right.
And the way that the bonded networks work is they're actually going to combine all these different signals together. So you're going to have different carriers put together so that you can meet that requirement that you have. So you're not just on one carrier, you're going to bond a few together to get as much upload strength as possible.
Hmm. And Mike was also mentioning that they've been doing some testing with T-Mobile. T-Mobile launched their 5G network last year, end of last year, and he said that they had some really nice results with that. So the speed, the 5G speed in those areas where it's available is really good.
Well, and that's just it. 5G is it's going to be the backbone of the future for telecommunications, for video, for everything that we're doing. Even in the future when we have smart driving cars, there's going to be a lot of data flowing between those cars and the relay stations and the communication centers. So we need to have those networks in place, and they're going to be leveraged for all kinds of different communications and different entertainment things
Hmm.
that we see
Hmm.
now.
And speaking of 5G, if you want to learn more about 5G, and also if you want to read about the 4 levels of redundancy, we have all of that in our lovely magazine right here. I'll pull up my prop. Um, Evolution magazine. You can also download it online. There's a digital copy available at epiphan.com/mag. I'm going to post that link into chat right now. We have an article on 5G, on the 4 levels of redundancy. So if you guys want to read that about that in more detail, we'll have a link available for you.
Thank you, Marta.
And
That was a shameless plug for our magazine.
shameless plug. I don't care.
Um, it's a shame that we printed out. How many copies of that did we print out right before the pandemic
Oh
hit?
gosh. Oh gosh. So many. And it was funny because we printed a smaller batch. We printed maybe 3,000 and they just flew out.
Yeah, they were
This,
super popular.
yeah, this was maybe January. And then end of January, beginning of February, we printed thousands more. Thousands. And they're sitting somewhere waiting for you guys.
Well, the plan was to hand them out at the next trade shows that we were doing this year. So obviously those are a little bit delayed, but we will be hitting the trade show circuit again once everything clears up and we're able to meet in person, maybe without handshaking or too much moist talking, as our prime minister called it,
Moist talking.
without as
Famous
much of the
moist.
moist talk.
Hmm.
But we'll be happy to hand those out. And like Marta said, it's available as a PDF as well, so you can access that on our website. So please go and check that out. Now there was
Hmm.
another comment from from Tim about the cutover. Now the way that I understand it, the way that these modems work is that it's not constantly running, but the way that Mike explained it is that the signal was actually going through that 5G modem or through the LTE wireless modem. And if that modem detected that the signal from the hard line was lost, then it would activate.
Hmm.
So I don't think that you would have that running constantly because, that service would be very expensive and you'd probably want to make sure it wasn't running just all the time. But yeah, if that's not the right answer, I'll hear back from Mike a little bit later, and maybe we can follow up with Danny or Tim on a
Hmm.
future episode.
And also keep in mind that there's always a buffer, right? So live streaming has that latency built in to be able to buffer a bit of video in case something goes wrong. So I'm sure there's a bit of time for that failover to happen without any packet loss.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So producer Alex Lisman, I don't know if this whole comment's going to fit into the display or not, but he was saying the importance of professional hardware and redundancy and backups, all that prep. Good to hear from other highly experienced streaming professionals about how they set up for success. So, oh yeah, the whole comment does fit on there. So that's something we say over and over again, especially if you're going to be making a business out of this, or if it's your livelihood. You want to make sure that you are setting yourself up, doing the testing, making sure everything's redundant. Mike takes things to the next level, having multiple encoders and multiple network setups. But at the end of the day, if one of those fails and there isn't a backup, then that's going to affect your business and affect your standing in the community as well as someone that's reliable.
That's right. And we know that Mike takes special care in testing all of this. He does tests obviously outside of the main event. He would bring down the network and then see if everything else falls in line. He would deliberately bring down each one of these failure points, right? Each one of these redundancy. He tests these redundancy paths by deliberately bringing down um, the sources, basically.
Exactly. Danny said that $3,000 seems a little bit cheap. That's probably just for the truck. I imagine it doesn't include any of the services or anything that goes with it. So you're gonna have to return it with a full tank of gas and make sure that you've got the service associated with it, probably on another contract or another agreement on there.
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll have to send Faithfulness a copy of the magazine. She could do some arts and crafts with it. I think that'd be fun.
Fantastic.
Cool,
Fantastic.
cool.
I think there was another question for you, Cameron. What was the signal chain for this pre-recorded segment? Danny is asking.
Oh, okay, so this one was actually a new experiment for us. So we don't do a lot of these pre-recorded segments anymore. We used to do them via Skype, and we would record the signal just on the Pearl or on a computer. So for this one, I actually took some advice from Wistia, and what we did was we recorded locally on the computers that were located both at Marta's, at her house, and then Mike's office. Now, when we got the files back from Mike, we did notice that there was some audio encoding issues, and I think it might have just been related to the hardware that was set up, but we'd have to kind of do a little bit more testing and see what happened there. Marta was recording directly into her computer using AVIO adapter and a camera. I think it was a Canon, right? Is the
Yes.
camera that you use?
Yes, R800, I think.
Yeah. And what
Candy
Mike
cam.
has set up is Mike has some PTZ camera set up and he has another switcher set up. So it might have been that extra layer in there, but we did notice there was a little bit of audio delay. It's kind of similar to what we normally see with Zoom, so it didn't seem super far off when we were doing the recording. But just to give a little bit more detail, I was giving direction to Marta and Mike, and we did do the whole thing via a Zoom call, but we actually recorded those assets locally. And recorded them locally in QuickTime at the maximum setting, which kicked out these huge ProRes files that I wasn't expecting. These MOV files, they're actually very big, and most of the time was just actually uploading and downloading those files again. That was a bigger task than I anticipated.
Yeah, that was kind of tricky. We're experimenting, Danny. There's another question that just came in. How can I live stream from an area where there's no Ethernet or Wi-Fi? I'm looking to record live bands out in open spaces, ranches, mountains, and other natural locations. So I think cell bonding would be a good choice for Guillermo. And I mean, if you have the budget for a satellite truck, you could do that. It might be a bit more expensive, a lot more expensive. But I would say cell bonding. Yeah, Cameron?
Well, cell bonding could be an option. It'll depend on what is, what's available in that area. Because if you're super remote and there's not even a cell signal, that may not be the best. But there was something. I don't think we ended up doing a blog post on it. We talked about looking at this content before, but Ubiquiti makes some point-to-point systems where you can actually have your internet source. Maybe it's like 10, 15 kilometers away from your actual setup, and you're going to beam that signal over some really high frequency, super high up towers that are basically sending a PoE signal, so kind of like a Wi-Fi signal itself. So you could have that satellite truck or have a truck somewhere that has a strong signal and then beam it over. It's a topic that I've wanted to cover on the live show before because I think it's very cool. It's kind of tricky to get into because the hardware is pretty expensive and actually setting it up. But there was a YouTube video, and I'll see if I can remember what it was, and I'll post it in the comments later. But there was a vlogger out of Vancouver that did some testing with Ubiquiti gear and was doing peer-to-peer just to demonstrate that. But either,
Yes.
like Marta said, a satellite truck, maybe some cellular bonding, or if you can set up that station where you can actually beam the signal, that would be another option as well.
I think you're talking about Linus Tech Tips. He did a really nice video beaming internet over large distances. And we do have a blog on that actually, Cameron. And I posted it in chat just now, long distance Wi-Fi streaming. You should check that out. We do talk about exactly what you just talked about, Cameron. We do, yeah. So definitely check out
And
that
so
blog.
I thought we had a blog on that, and we were going to turn the blog into a live show. It was one of the many plans that ended up in the parking lot, but maybe something to revisit now.
It's a hard one to set up. It's not super easy.
And you do have to have some technical skills, obviously, to set that up. And if you remember from the Linus Tech video, you have to have it perfectly lined up, or else you don't get the signal right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, well, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out our webinars. Another shameless plug. We do have great webinars coming up. I'm also going to post a link into chat. We cover a lot of the things that all of us want to know about right now, doing productions from home, setting up a home studio, remote workflows. So be sure to check those out and sign up for new ones.
And that's right, we've been covering those webinars 2 a week and all kinds of different topics. So, like Marta said, check it out on our website. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. And we broadcast every Thursday at 3 p.m. on Facebook, Twitch if you're watching, and YouTube. And Marta, we have a pretty sweaty episode next week. Is that a good way of
Yes,
describing it?
yes. Moist episode. We're going to be talking about fitness live streaming, how to set up live streaming if you're a fitness instructor, how to do it from home, and how all of that works. It's going to be a great episode. It's going to be a fun one.
Marta and George are going to get their burn on, so I'm looking forward to seeing that as well.
Yeah, should be
All right,
fun.
everybody, thanks for watching, and we'll see you again.
Bye.